The sky was burning. Athens' small exploration ship shook as it crashed through the thick clouds of an unknown planet. Alarms screamed inside the cockpit. Smoke filled the air. He pulled hard on the controls, trying to slow the fall, but it was no use. Then boom, the ship hit the ground. Trees snapped, metal groaned, everything went black. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was lying in a bed of strange blue moss. His head throbbed. His suit was torn. Sparks danced from the broken panels of his ship. Behind him, the engine was gone. The radio was dead. He was alone. Ethan stood up slowly, grabbing his pack. He looked around. Tall trees with glowing leaves surrounded him. Purple vines moved slightly, even though there was no wind. Strange animal calls echoed through the jungle, none of them familiar. "This isn't on any star map," he whispered. He had landed on a planet not marked by the Union, a wild world unexplored, untouched. His first mission was survival. He checked the air, it was breathable, the gravity was light, good. His water supply was low, so he followed the sound of flowing water through the trees. As he walked, he passed massive roots shaped like claws. Some trees had eyes that blinked slowly. Insects the size of his hand flew past. The jungle felt alive. It watched him. He heard a sudden growl. He turned fast but saw nothing. He kept moving. Finally, he found it, a river wide and silver glowing under the twin suns. Steam rose from it softly. Ethan crouched near the water and filled his canteen. The water felt clean, cool. He took a deep breath, about to drink. That's when he heard it splash. His head snapped up. Something or someone was in the water. He crawled behind a large rock and peeked. His eyes widened. A tall figure stood waist-deep in the river. Her skin was a smooth, glowing teal. Her long black hair flowed like silk down her back. She moved with grace like a dancer. Water trickled off her body as she bathed, unaware of his presence. Ethan's heart pounded. She wasn't human, but she was beautiful, alien and dangerous. He stayed still. He didn't want to startle her or get caught. But then the water changed. It started bubbling around her. Waves rippled. Something moved below the surface. The woman looked down sharply. Suddenly, a huge shape burst out of the river behind her, a massive serpent with gleaming green scales and rows of sharp teeth. It roared, the sound shaking the trees. Ethan gasped. The alien woman turned fast. From the rocks nearby, she pulled a blade made of glowing crystal. She didn't scream, she didn't run, she attacked. The fight was fast and wild. She jumped onto the serpent's head, slashing with incredible speed. Her body moved like lightning, dodging every snap of the monster's jaws. Ethan watched, frozen. After a brutal battle, the serpent gave a final hiss and collapsed into the river, dead. The woman stood on the shore, her body dripping, her blade still glowing. Then she fell to one knee. She was hurt. Ethan hesitated. He could run, hide, stay away, but something pulled at him. She had just fought to survive, alone like him. He stepped out from behind the rock and walked slowly toward her. "Hey," he said, raising both hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." She turned her head quickly. Her glowing eyes narrowed. She reached for her blade. "I just want to help," Ethan said carefully, moving closer. "You're hurt." She looked at him in silence. Her breathing was heavy. Then, without a word, she raised her hand. Vines shot up from the ground. They wrapped around Ethan's legs and arms, pulling him down hard. He couldn't move. "Wait," he shouted, "please." The woman walked over to him, standing tall, blood from her arm dripping onto the vines. She stared at him. Her face was unreadable. Then she spoke in a deep, strange voice. "You do not belong here, offworlder." Ethan struggled. "I'm not your enemy." She leaned close. "Everyone says that," she said coldly. The vines tightened. Darkness filled Ethan's vision again. The river beast attacks darkness wrapped around Ethan like a heavy blanket. He felt the vines gripping his arms and legs, holding him down. He tried to speak, but his mouth wouldn't move. His heart beat louder than the jungle sounds. His mind screamed, "Wake up, move, do something." Then light, a sharp golden light, pierced through the shadows behind his eyes. He gasped and opened them. He was still near the river. The alien woman stood over him, her blade glowing faintly. The vines no longer squeezed him, but they still held him tight to the ground. She had not killed him. Yet. Ethan blinked, breathing hard. "You saved me," the woman said nothing. She was kneeling nearby, clutching her side where the serpent had struck her. Thick, glowing blood ran between her fingers. She was strong, yes, but bleeding badly, and she was alone. The sun dipped lower in the sky. The river's glow dimmed to a soft, eerie shimmer. Strange creatures began to sing in the trees. The jungle was changing, preparing for night. Ethan cleared his throat. "You're hurt, you need help." Still, she said nothing. Her glowing eyes watched him closely, like a hawk studying a small animal. Slowly, her hand reached for a pouch on her belt. She took out a small green leaf, crushed it in her palm, and pressed it to her wound. The bleeding slowed. Ethan felt the vines loosen a little. He dared to speak again. "My name is Ethan," he said quietly. "I'm not your enemy. I crashed here. My ship, it's broken. I have no way to contact my crew." She turned her head slightly. "Ethan." He nodded. "Yes, that's me." She stood up with effort and walked to the serpent's corpse. Its body was huge, still half floating in the river, its mouth full of jagged teeth. She cut off one long fang and tied it to her belt. Only then did she speak again. "I am Zainer, guardian of the Osha River, daughter of fire and vine." Ethan nodded slowly. "Zainer, that's a strong name." She didn't smile. "You are lucky, Ethan. If you had come yesterday, I would have killed you." He tried to sit up, "But you didn't." She looked at him. "Because I saw fear in your eyes, not the fear of being caught, the fear of seeing something you've never seen before and not wanting it to die." Her voice softened just a little. "You watched me fight. You didn't run." "I wanted to help," Ethan said honestly, "but I didn't know how." Zainer studied him for a moment. Then she moved her fingers in the air. The vines released Ethan and slithered back into the ground. He sat up slowly, rubbing his wrists. "Thanks." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned toward the trees. "Come, the night things are coming. They smell blood." They walked through the jungle side by side, but silent. Zainer moved like a shadow, fast and light even while wounded. Ethan tried to keep up, his boots crunching softly on the mossy ground. The air grew cooler, the trees thicker. Strange, glowing eyes blinked from the shadows. "What are the night things?" Ethan whispered. "Hunters," she said. "Not like the serpent, smarter, quieter, and they don't fear pain." Ethan shivered. Soon they reached a small cave hidden behind thick vines. Zainer moved her hand again, and the vines slid open like a curtain. Inside, glowing crystals lit the stone walls with soft blue light. Ethan followed her in. The moment they entered, the vines closed behind them. "Safe for now." Zainer sat against the wall and unwrapped her wound. The bleeding had slowed, but the cut was deep. Ethan knelt beside her. "I can help. I have medical foam in my pack." She raised an eyebrow. "Foam." He opened his kit and pulled out a small silver can. "Watch." He sprayed a bit on his own scratched hand. The foam hissed and formed a soft patch. The cut sealed almost instantly. Zainer's eyes widened slightly. "Human magic." Ethan smiled. "Not magic, just tech." She allowed him to spray her wound. The foam sizzled and hardened, glowing faintly. She winced but then relaxed. "Better." She nodded. "Much." There was a long silence. Then she said, "Why are you really here, Ethan?" He looked down. "I was part of an exploration crew. We were mapping unclaimed space. A storm hit. I lost control and crashed here. I didn't even know this planet existed." "No one is supposed to," Zainer said. "We've kept it hidden for centuries, away from machines, away from war." He looked around the glowing cave. "It's beautiful, your world. It feels alive." "It is," she said softly. "Every tree, every river, even the wind has memory." She looked at him again. "But you're not like the others I've seen." Ethan blinked. "Others?" She stood, her voice colder now. "Not long ago, another human came. He promised peace, promised knowledge. Then he took what he wanted and burned the rest." Ethan's heart sank. "I didn't know." "Now you do." She turned away but didn't leave. Instead, she said, "You say you want to leave, fix your ship, go home." "Yes." Then he proved he was not like the one who came before. Ethan stood. "How?" Zainer faced him. "You must survive the jungle. You must earn the jungle's trust and mine." He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." She stepped close. Tomorrow your trial begins. If you pass, I will help you. And if I fail? Her glowing eyes narrowed. Then the jungle will keep your bones. Captured by the Amazonians. The sky turned orange as morning light spilled over the jungle. Twin suns rose above the mist, casting strange golden shadows across the trees. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and danger. Ethan woke in the vine-covered cave, heart still heavy with the words Zaner had spoken the night before. You must survive the jungle. You must earn its trust and mine. He didn't know exactly what that meant, but he knew one thing. This was no ordinary planet, and Zaner was no ordinary woman. Zaner stood outside the cave, already alert, already watching. Her wound had stopped bleeding. Her blade was sharpened. Her eyes burned with silent strength. She looked like a queen of the wild, carved from nature itself. You are slow, human, she said without turning. Ethan rubbed his eyes. It's barely dawn. Out here, dawn is when the predators sleep and the weak die. Time is not your friend. He stepped forward. What's the trial? What do I have to do? Zaner didn't answer. She simply motioned with her hand. Vines slithered from the ground and wrapped tightly around Ethan again. This time he didn't struggle. He trusted her. A little. We're doing the vine thing again, he joked, trying to stay calm. Zaner didn't smile. You will not survive the trial as you are. You are soft. Your weapons are gone. Your knowledge means nothing to the trees. With a wave of her fingers, the vines lifted Ethan into the air and carried him through the jungle like a prisoner. They moved for hours above the forest floor, high in the trees where the branches tangled like spider webs. The jungle buzzed below them. Alien birds screamed. Insects clicked. Large shadows moved between the leaves. Finally, they arrived. A massive tree rose from the ground like a mountain. Its trunk was wider than a house. Its roots coiled like dragons. At the base of the tree sat a circle of tall women warriors like Zaner, dressed in vines and bone armor. Their skin glowed in shades of green, blue, and gold. They looked at Ethan like he was a bug. One of them stood. She had a long scar across her cheek and held a staff taller than Ethan. Her voice was cold and sharp. You bring another outsider here, Zaner. He is not like the last, Zaner replied. All of them say that, another warrior muttered. Zaner stepped forward. He fought nothing. He ran from no one. He offered help. He will take the trial of roots. The warriors laughed. Another human boy trying to play hero, let him try. Let the jungle swallow him. Zaner raised her voice. If he fails, his bones belong to the trees. If he succeeds, he may leave in peace. The lead warrior gave a slow nod. Very well, the trial begins now. Ethan was dropped onto the jungle floor, the vines unwrapped. No weapons, no gear, nothing but his clothes and his courage. He looked around. So what exactly am I supposed to do? A whisper echoed through the trees, not from a person but from the forest itself. Survive until the moon rises. Then the jungle moved. Vines snapped shut behind him, trees twisted. Paths vanished. He was completely alone. Ethan took a deep breath. All right, jungle, let's play. At first, he moved carefully. He remembered Zaner's words. Even the wind has memory. So he didn't rush. He listened. He watched. He used small sticks to test the ground. He avoided flowers that moved and trees that dripped strange sap. Then came the first test. A nest of glowing, spider-like creatures hissed from the branches. One dropped in front of him, its legs sharp, eyes bright. It opened its mouth to spray acid. Ethan ducked behind a rock. The acid melted a hole in the ground. He grabbed a long branch and jabbed forward, knocking the creature back. He didn't kill it, but he escaped. One down, hours passed. He was scratched, bruised, hungry. The sun grew hotter. He found fruit hanging from a tree, but the moment he touched it, the bark screamed. He dropped the fruit and ran. By midday, Ethan's legs were heavy. He wanted to quit. But then he heard it, a soft, sad sound, crying. He turned toward it, crawling through thick roots. What he found stopped him. A small creature, like a monkey made of leaves and fur, was trapped in a net made of sticky vines. It chirped in pain, its tiny eyes full of fear. Ethan looked around. This could be a trap. The jungle might be testing him. He didn't care. He rushed forward and pulled at the vines. They were strong, but he remembered something. The vines hated fire. He used the emergency flare from his pocket, his only tool. He lit it, and the vines hissed, pulling back. The little creature fell into his arms, shaking. Ethan smiled. Gotcha. The creature blinked, then it climbed up to his shoulder and stayed there. Ethan didn't know it, but the jungle had seen this act, and it had taken notice. Night began to fall. Ethan stumbled back to the trial grounds, dirty, tired, and bleeding from the leg. The small creature still rode on his shoulder. The warrior women stood waiting, arms crossed. Zayner stepped forward. You are alive. Barely, Ethan muttered, wiping dirt from his face. She looked at the small creature on his shoulder and raised an eyebrow. You rescued a sproutling. Most people fear them. He needed help. The lead warrior stepped forward and placed her staff on the ground. The jungle has spoken, she said. You passed. Ethan blinked. That's it, I'm done. No, Zayner said softly. You're just beginning. The jungle trial. The jungle was breathing, not with lungs, but with life. Every branch, leaf, and root pulsed like veins in a giant living creature. As the second sun faded behind the trees, the forest shifted into its night form. It whispered, it watched, and now it remembered Ethan. He sat near a fire made from blue-tinged wood, its flames giving off a soft hum instead of a crackle. The sproutling, his tiny leaf-fur friend, curled up in his lap, chirping softly as it slept. Around him, the Amazonian warrior women prepared for the evening ritual. Zayner stood across from him, sharpening her blade. Her arm was now fully healed thanks to the foam. Her eyes were fixed on Ethan, but her expression was unreadable. You passed the test of survival, she said at last. Now begins the trial of spirit. Ethan frowned. Wasn't that already the trial? Zayner shook her head. That was only the beginning. The jungle tested your instincts. Now it will test your truth. He shifted. What does that mean? It means the forest will show you who you are and who you could become. Later that night, Ethan followed Zayner through a thick path lined with glowing stones. They arrived at a sacred grove, circular, quiet, filled with still water at the center. The other warriors remained behind. This trial was different. It was personal. Zayner handed Ethan a carved wooden cup. Drink this, she said. It will connect you to the roots. Ethan hesitated. The liquid inside shimmered with gold and green like sunlight and moss mixed together. He took a breath and drank. At first, nothing happened. Then his head spun. The stars above began to swirl. The trees stretched higher. The ground opened beneath his feet. Suddenly, darkness, then visions. He stood on Earth again. He saw himself as a child staring at the stars through a small telescope. One day I'll touch them, his younger voice whispered. Then he saw his past, training, laughter, pain, fear. He saw himself abandoning a friend during a failed mission, that guilt. He had buried it, but the jungle remembered. The vision changed. Now he was older, back at the crash site, but instead of helping Zayner, he ran. In this vision, he let the serpent kill her. He watched from the trees as she died screaming. No, Ethan whispered, that's not me. But the forest asked, is it not? He saw Earth again, military meetings, plans to claim unknown worlds. Greed dressed as science, his own people plotting to take, not learn, his body trembled. Then the jungle gave him one final vision, Zayner alone, standing against fire as human ships descended from the sky. She fought. She burned. She fell. And above her stood Ethan, cold, powerful, wearing the uniform of the enemy. No, he shouted, I'm not that man. Suddenly light poured through the dark. Zayner's voice echoed in his mind. Then prove it. He opened his eyes with a gasp. He was lying on the ground near the still water, sweat trickling from his forehead. His hands were shaking. Zayner stood over him, calm. You saw, he nodded. I saw everything, even the parts I wanted to forget. The jungle shows no mercy, she said, not even to the innocent. Ethan sat up. I've done things I regret. I've made choices, some selfish, but I want to do better. I want to help, not take. She crouched beside him. The forest believes in second chances, so do I. The next day, the final test began. Zayner led Ethan to the Valley of Voices, a place where every tree was said to carry the spirit of those who had died protecting the land. The jungle remembers betrayal, she said, but it also remembers courage. They climbed down a steep ridge surrounded by thousands of towering stone roots. As they walked, the wind began to whisper words, names, voices long gone. It chilled Ethan to the bone. Suddenly, a deep growl echoed through the valley. Zainer stopped, her hand moved to her blade. "What is it?" Ethan whispered. She didn't answer. Then they saw it. A creature stepped out from the mist, taller than any man, covered in black armor made of bark and bone. Its face was like a mask carved from stone, but it wasn't alive, it was a guardian spirit. Ethan froze. "What the hell is that?" "A memory given form," Zainer said. "It exists to test those who claim loyalty to this land." The guardian raised a long branch-like spear. Zainer stepped forward. "You must face it alone." Ethan's heart pounded. "Alone." She nodded. "This is your truth to fight." The battle was not like anything Ethan had faced before. The guardian didn't bleed. It didn't slow. It moved like wind, fast, quiet, ruthless. Ethan dodged and rolled, using everything he learned from watching Zainer, the jungle's terrain, the trees, the vines. He didn't try to overpower the guardian. He tried to outthink it. He led it into a snare of living vines, then kicked a fallen crystal stone into a tree root, triggering a burst of pollen. The guardian froze for a moment. Ethan ran up a rock and leaped, grabbing a broken branch and striking the creature's mask. The mask cracked. The guardian paused, then slowly lowered its spear. It bowed and vanished into dust. Zainer walked into the valley. "You survived the trial of spirit, the trial of heart, and the trial of battle," she said. "You are no longer a stranger here." Ethan stood, bruised and gasping. "Then you'll help me fix my ship." She nodded. "I will, but first there's something you must see." The hidden enemy. The jungle sang a different song now. Where once it whispered warnings, now it hummed softly, almost like approval. Ethan could feel the change, not just in the air, but in himself. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He belonged, at least for now. Zainer led him through a hidden mountain path that twisted high above the valley. Below them, the glowing rivers looked like silver veins cutting through the green heart of the world. "I thought we were going to repair my ship," Ethan said, catching his breath as they climbed. "We will," Zainer replied, "but first you must see what's truly at stake." Her voice had changed. It wasn't just serious. It was heavy, like a secret long buried. After hours of hiking, they reached a cliffside overlook. Behind them, the jungle stretched endlessly. Ahead, buried in the trees, was something else. A structure, metal, human. Ethan's blood ran cold. He crouched. "That's not mine." "No," Zainer said quietly. "It was built by the other human, the one who came before you." They moved closer, careful to stay hidden in the thick vines. The structure was shaped like a dome, made of steel and concrete. Solar panels blinked on the roof. Drones buzzed silently overhead. Ethan's stomach twisted. "This looks like a forward base." Zainer nodded. "He came 3 seasons ago, said he was alone, said he was exploring." "What happened?" "At first he learned from us, asked questions, took notes, then he sent a signal." Ethan's eyes widened. "A beacon." "Yes, a silent call to others, a call to come and take." She looked at him, her voice low. "We call him Vas. He was charming, strong like you, but he saw our world not as a living place, but as a resource." Ethan's fists clenched. Zainer continued. "He captured tribes, forced them to dig into the sacred roots, looking for crystals, metals, things your kind value. And you tried to stop him." She looked down. "We fought, we lost." They reached a higher vantage point. Below, Ethan saw what he hadn't expected: humans. A full crew, soldiers in armor, engineers, machines tearing into the earth, trees being ripped out, roots exposed. And behind it all, a man, tall, clean, uniform, commanding voice. Vas, he stood like a king in the jungle, giving orders while looking perfectly at ease. "Your people think this planet is unclaimed," Zainer said, "but they never asked if it had a voice." Ethan's hands trembled. "This wasn't part of any mission briefing. We didn't know." "Now you do," he turned to her. "Why bring me here?" "Because I want to see your choice," she said. Now that you've passed the trials, will you return to them or will you stand with us? They returned to the village that night. The tribe gathered around the great flame, their faces quiet but tense. Zaner stood before them, her voice loud and clear. "He has seen the invaders," she said. "He knows the truth, and still he stands among us." Some of the warriors looked uneasy. "He is still one of them," one growled. "His skin, his blood, he is their brother." "He passed the jungle's tests," Zaner replied. "The forest chose him. Do you not trust the will of the jungle?" An old woman stepped forward, Elder Ma, her skin lined with age and wisdom. "If the forest believes in him," she said slowly, "then so must we." She turned to Ethan. "But know this, child of Earth, if you betray us, the vines will not save you, the trees will not speak your name, you will vanish like a leaf in flame." Ethan swallowed hard. "I understand." Later in private, Ethan sat with Zaner near the glowing river. "I know him," he said quietly. "Commander Voss, he was once a hero back on Earth, led missions, explored new systems. He disappeared years ago." Zaner nodded. "He did not disappear, he chose to stay. Power makes people stay." Ethan stared at the stars. "He's building something down there, maybe even preparing for more ships. We don't have time." "He grows stronger every moon," she said, "and we grow fewer." He looked at her, "Then let's stop him." The next day, Ethan and Zaner began planning. She showed him old maps, tunnels beneath the Earth, paths her ancestors had used for centuries. He gave her information on human tech, how to block signals, how to disable drones, how to crack security. Together, they were something new, something the jungle had never seen, human knowledge, alien instinct, side by side. But Voss was not blind. That night, as the tribe prepared to move, the jungle trembled. Explosions echoed through the trees, fire lit the sky. "They found us," a warrior shouted. Drones swarmed from above, their lights blinking red. Human soldiers burst through the vines with stun rifles and scanners. Chaos exploded. Zaner raised her blade and shouted commands. Ethan helped children hide beneath the roots, then turned to fight beside her. They moved like one. She struck like lightning. He covered her with tech, blinding drones with pulse lights, hacking their signals to send them crashing. But it wasn't enough. A heavy shot hit the great flame. It shattered into sparks. The heart of the village went dark. Then, from the smoke, Voss appeared, clapping. "Well done, Ethan," he said. "I knew you were still alive." Ethan stepped forward. "Stop this, you don't have to do this." Voss smirked. "But I do. You're thinking too small. This planet has resources beyond anything Earth's seen. I'm just doing what humanity always does, winning." Zaner's blade gleamed. "Not this time." Voss raised his hand. "Take them alive." Soldiers moved in. Ethan whispered, "We need to go now." Zaner nodded. "Follow me." They fled into the jungle's deep roots, into tunnels only her people knew. The jungle closed behind them, hiding their trail, but the war had begun. Rise of the warrior pair. The jungle was no longer quiet. Its peaceful whispers had turned into growls, groans, and cries. The air burned from the smoke of fallen trees. The vines curled away from the fire, hiding their sorrow. The sacred home of Zaner's people, once hidden, once safe, had been invaded, but it had not been broken, not yet. Deep beneath the forest, in ancient tunnels carved long before human feet touched this world, Ethan and Zaner stood side by side. They were not alone. The surviving warriors of the tribe gathered behind them, tired, wounded, but not afraid. "Voss is hunting us," Zaner said, voice steady. "He thinks he's already won, that we will keep running, that we will die in the dark." She looked at Ethan. "But today, we show him the jungle still has teeth." Ethan stepped forward. His hands were dirty, his face cut, his tech suit damaged, but his eyes burned with new purpose. "I used to believe humans were the good guys," he said, "that we came to explore, to learn, but I was wrong. We came to take." He looked at the warriors. "But now I know the truth, and I choose your side." The old warrior with the scar across her face grunted. "Words are easy, human." Ethan nodded. "Then let me show you more than words." They got to work. Ethan and Zaner formed a plan not just to survive, but to strike back. Zaner knew the jungle, its hidden paths, its breathing roots, its silent watchers in the trees. Ethan knew technology, how to sabotage, how to disrupt. Together, they created something new, jungle warfare powered by human knowledge. They gathered rare jungle crystals that could short-circuit machines. Ethan connected them to broken drone parts, turning them into M-traps. They carved decoy trails, rigged false heat signals, and led patrols into poison fog pockets. They tamed jungle beasts, Ethan riding one like a scaled panther as it bounded through the trees. And they waited. 3 nights later, the strike began. Voss's base was wide, armored, and protected by auto turrets, drones, and laser walls. It was a fortress, but it wasn't ready for the forest to fight back. The first blast came from beneath. Ethan had tunneled under the wall using ancient route paths. He planted crystal charges along the supports. When they blew, the east gate collapsed. From the treetops, Zayner's warriors flew in, leaping branch to branch, raining crystal spears and bone darts down on the guards. The drones rose, but Ethan's EMP crystals detonated midair, frying their circuits. They dropped like metal birds. Then came the second wave. Zayner herself led it, riding a beast of the jungle, half tiger, half lizard, 10 feet tall. She roared louder than any war cry, her glowing blade in hand, cutting through metal and armor alike. Ethan followed close, using a hacked drone controller to disable turret systems. The humans fought back, stun rifles, sonic mines, shock nets, but they were out of place, out of rhythm. The jungle moved too fast, too wild, and Ethan had learned how to move with it. Inside the base, alarms screamed. Voss stood at the central command tower, watching the chaos on the monitors, his jaw clenched. "She brought him," he muttered. "I knew he'd betray us." An officer ran in. "Sir, we're losing the outer wall. Their tech is inside our systems." "Shut it down," Voss barked. "Prepare the mech." Minutes later, the battlefield shook. A giant metal machine emerged from the ground, 10 feet tall, painted black and red, shaped like a human skeleton. Voss piloted it from within, his voice booming through speakers. "Enough games, this jungle dies tonight." The mech fired plasma bolts, tearing through trees and stone alike. It stomped through warriors, scattering them. Ethan and Zayner regrouped. "We can't fight that thing head-on," Ethan said. Zayner looked at him, eyes calm. "Then we fight it the jungle way." They split up. Ethan ran through the trees, drawing fire, planting signal jammers that messed with the mech's sensors. It slowed, confused. Zayner leaped onto its back, blade slicing into the joints. Voss roared inside. "You think you can stop me? I'm the future of your world." "No," Zayner said. "You are its past." She jabbed her blade into a power port, shorting one of its arms. Sparks flew, but the mech tossed her aside like a rag doll. She hit the ground hard, groaning. Ethan screamed, "Zayner!" He ran toward her, sliding down the muddy slope. Voss turned the mech toward them, plasma cannon charging. Ethan looked at Zayner. Her eyes were open, barely. "Get up," he whispered. "Please."